For most of my life, I believed I had the kind of family people envied. We lived in a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other, the kind of place where laughter carried across fences and secrets stayed neatly tucked behind painted doors. My mother was warm and admired, always ready with a smile that made others feel seen. My father was respected, steady, reliable, the man people turned to when something needed fixing, whether it was a broken fence or a broken plan. And then there was my older brother, Daniel the Golden One, confident, charismatic, effortlessly loved. And me, I was the shadow that learned to smile just enough to belong. It wasn't that my parents didn't love me. At least, that's what I told myself. They provided, they showed up, they said the right things. But love has a strange way of revealing itself in the smallest details. The pauses, the glances, the things left unsaid. Like how my father would ruffle Daniel's hair with pride, but only offer me a polite nod. Or how my mother would beam at Daniel's stories, but gently redirect mine. As if mine were too much, too inconvenient, too something. I learned early not to ask what that something was. Growing up, I noticed little things that didn't quite fit. At first, they were easy to ignore. A photo album where my baby pictures looked different. Not just younger, different. My features didn't quite match theirs. My eyes, my smile. Subtle things that didn't belong in the family portrait. When I once joked about it at dinner, maybe I'm adopted or something, my mother's fork froze midair. My father chuckled a second too late. Daniel looked down at his plate, and then, just like that, the moment was gone. "Don't be silly," my mother said quickly, her voice light but her eyes too sharp. "You're exactly where you belong." I laughed it off. I always did, because questioning it felt wrong, like pulling on a thread that might unravel everything. Still, the feeling stayed. It was there in the way relatives would sometimes hesitate before answering simple questions. In the way conversations would shift when I entered the room. In the way my mother would grow tense whenever I asked about her life before marriage. Once, I found an old box tucked away in the attic. It was dusty, forgotten, the kind of thing no one expected to be opened. Inside were letters yellowed with time, edges curling like they were trying to hide what they carried. I didn't read them. I told myself I wouldn't invade my parents' privacy, that I trusted them, that I didn't need answers to questions I wasn't even sure how to ask. But as I closed the box, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. A photograph had slipped out. It was of my mother, much younger, her smile softer, freer, and beside her stood a man I had never seen before. His arm was around her, his expression full of something I couldn't quite name. Love. Real, unguarded love. My father had never looked at her like that. I stared at the photo longer than I should have. Something about it felt familiar. Not in memory, but in a deeper, unexplainable way, like recognizing a face in a dream you can't quite remember. Footsteps echoed from below, and I quickly shoved the photo back into the box, my heart pounding like I'd done something wrong. That night I barely slept, because for the first time, the feeling I had always ignored began to take shape. It wasn't just that I felt different. It was that I didn't belong. The next morning, everything went back to normal: breakfast at the table, casual conversations, my mother humming as she poured coffee, my father reading the paper like always. Daniel teased me about something trivial, and I laughed on cue. But as I looked around the table, something had shifted. The smiles felt rehearsed, the warmth felt measured. And for the first time in my life, I realized something unsettling. Maybe the life I thought was perfect was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie. The feeling didn't go away. No matter how much I tried to bury it under routines, laughter, and the familiar rhythm of everyday life, something inside me had shifted after that night in the attic. It was like seeing a crack in a mirror. You could still see your reflection, but you couldn't ignore the fracture running through it. I started noticing everything, not just the obvious differences I had brushed off as a kid, but the quiet, almost invisible details that suddenly felt louder. My father, no, the man I had always called my father, seemed more distant than ever. Not cold, not unkind, just detached. Like he was fulfilling a role he had memorized years ago. And my mother, she watched me more closely now. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I caught her staring, really staring, when she thought I wasn't looking. There was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place, not just love, not just concern, fear. It made my stomach twist. One evening I decided I couldn't pretend anymore. "Mom," I said casually, leaning against the kitchen counter while she chopped vegetables, "do we have any old family records, like birth certificates, stuff like that?" Her knife stopped mid-slice. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it, but I didn't. "Why do you need that?" she asked, her voice too steady. "I don't know," I shrugged, trying to sound indifferent, just curious for forms and things. She resumed chopping a little too quickly. "Everything you need is already filed away. Don't worry about it." That was it. End of conversation. Or at least that's what she thought, because her reaction didn't calm me. It confirmed everything. That night, I went back to the attic. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the same dusty box. This time, I didn't hesitate. I pulled out the letters one by one, my breath shallow as if the air itself had thickened. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name at the bottom of the first letter made my chest tighten. Elias. I read faster, my eyes scanning words that felt like they weren't meant for me, and yet somehow always were. He wrote about missing her, about wanting to see him, about not understanding why she had cut him off. There was confusion, desperation, and something else woven between the lines: hope. My heart pounded harder with every sentence. The dates didn't lie. These letters were written around the time I was born. A cold wave of realization washed over me. Him, not them, not Daniel and me, just him. I dropped the letter as if it had burned me. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, that doesn't mean. It means exactly what you think it does." The voice came from the doorway. I froze. Slowly, I turned around. Daniel stood there, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "You knew." My voice came out smaller than I intended. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped into the room, closing the distance between us. His eyes flickered to the letters scattered in my hands. "I was wondering when you'd find those," he said quietly. The words hit harder than any shout. "How long?" I demanded, anger rising to the surface, sharp and sudden. "How long have you known?" He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "Long enough." "That's not an answer, Daniel." My voice cracked. Was I the only one in this family who didn't know who I was? His jaw tightened. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, I'm sorry. Was there a better way? Another 26 years, maybe." He flinched but didn't deny it. "That was the worst part. You all lied to me," I said, my voice dropping, trembling with something deeper than anger. "My entire life was a lie." "It wasn't a lie," he said quickly. "They were trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" I shot back. "The truth." He didn't respond, because he couldn't. The silence between us said everything. I looked down at the letter again, the name Elias blurring as tears filled my eyes. "Who is he?" I whispered. Daniel hesitated, and in that hesitation, I felt my heart break all over again. Finally, he spoke. "He's your real father." The words landed like a storm, tearing through everything I thought I knew. For a moment I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't even feel anything except the deafening echo of one question. If he was my father, then who had I been living with all this time? And more importantly, why had they kept him from me? I didn't cry, not at first. After Daniel said the words, "He's your real father," something inside me went completely still, like a storm had passed through and left nothing behind but silence. My hands were still clutching the letters, but I couldn't feel them anymore. I just stood there, staring at him, waiting, because there had to be more. "There's a reason," Daniel said finally, his voice quieter now, almost careful. "It's not just some random secret they kept for no reason." I let out a hollow laugh. "Oh good, that makes it better." He ignored the sarcasm, stepping closer. "His name is Elias. He and Mom, they were together before she met Dad. Like, really together, not some short thing. They were serious." I swallowed hard, trying to process it. My mind kept replaying that photograph, the way my mother smiled, the way that man looked at her like she was everything. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Daniel hesitated again, and I felt irritation spike. "Daniel, just tell me the truth for once." He nodded, like he'd been expecting that. "Grandpa didn't approve," he said. "Elias didn't come from the kind of background the family wanted. He didn't have money, connections, any of it. Grandpa thought Mom would ruin her life if she stayed with him. So they broke up." I asked, though something in my chest already knew it wasn't that simple. Daniel shook his head. "No, they didn't want to." A chill ran down my spine. "They were forced apart," he continued. "Mom was pressured hard, and when she found out she was pregnant," he trailed off, but I could already see where this was going. "She chose security." I finished quietly. "She chose the family over him." Daniel didn't argue. Instead, he said something worse. "She chose us." The word hit differently now, us. As if I had been part of a decision I never got to make. "And him?" I asked, gripping the edge of the box to steady myself. "What about Elias? Did he just disappear?" Daniel's expression shifted, something like guilt flickering across his face. "No," he said. "He tried." I looked up sharply. He wrote letters, called, showed up a few times even, but Grandpa made sure he never got through. And once Mom married Dad, it was over, completely. The room felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. "So he didn't abandon me." I whispered, "No." Daniel said firmly, "He didn't." The words settled deep in my chest, breaking something open. All these years, I hadn't even known there was someone out there who had wanted me, who had tried to reach me and had been pushed away. I thought about every birthday, every milestone, every quiet moment where I had felt like something was missing. He had been missing, not by choice, by force. "Does he know about me now?" I asked, my voice trembling. Daniel looked away. "I don't know," he admitted. "The letters stopped a long time ago. I think he gave up." That hurt more than anything. Not because he gave up, but because he had been made to. I sank down onto the old wooden floor, the weight of everything crashing into me all at once. My entire life had been built on decisions made by people who never once considered what I might feel when the truth came out. Or if it ever should. "They stole him from me," I said quietly. Daniel didn't respond, because there was nothing he could say to make that untrue. For a while, the only sound in the room was my uneven breathing. Then, slowly, another thought began to form. Cold, sharp, clear. You knew all of this, I said, looking up at him again. For how long? His shoulders tensed. Since I was 16, he admitted. I felt something twist inside me. 10 years, I said, my voice rising slightly. You watched me live my life confused, out of place, questioning myself. And you said nothing. I wanted to tell you, he said quickly. So many times. But Mom, what? I snapped. Told you to stay quiet, to keep the lie going. He didn't answer. Again and again, that silence said everything. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to calm down. Anger burned in my chest, but beneath it was something steadier, clarity. They don't get to control this anymore, I said. Daniel frowned slightly. What do you mean? I stood up, brushing dust off my hands, though I could still feel it clinging to me like the past refusing to let go. I mean, I said, meeting his eyes, I'm done being the last one to know the truth. A quiet determination settled over me. For 26 years, they decided what I should believe, who I should be, what I should know. I picked up the photograph again, staring at the man who had been erased from my life. Not anymore. Daniel studied me carefully, something unreadable in his expression. You're going to confront them, he said. It wasn't a question. I shook my head slowly. No, I replied. A small, controlled smile touched my lips, one that felt unfamiliar but right. I'm going to do something better. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I knew exactly how I was going to take my life back. Graduation day arrived wrapped in sunlight and applause. Everything looked exactly how it was supposed to. Rows of proud families filled the auditorium, cameras flashing, voices buzzing with excitement. Names were printed neatly in programs. Futures lined up in speeches, and smiles were worn like medals earned over years of effort. From the outside, I was just another graduate, cap, gown, composed, but inside, I was standing on the edge of a truth that had been buried for 26 years. My parents sat in the front row just as expected. My mother's smile was perfectly placed, her eyes scanning the stage with anticipation. My father sat beside her, posture straight, expression calm, playing his role as he always had. Daniel stood off to the side with the other speakers. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one in the dark. The ceremony began, names were called, applause rose and fell like waves. I walked across the stage, accepted my diploma, and shook hands with people who thought they knew me. I smiled for the cameras, but it wasn't the same smile anymore, because now it wasn't hiding anything. It was waiting. Then came the speeches, one by one. Students stepped up to the microphone, sharing stories of struggle, growth, gratitude. The audience listened politely, occasionally laughing, occasionally tearing up, and then next we have Daniel. A ripple of excitement passed through the crowd. Of course it did. Daniel was the kind of person people expected great things from, confident, articulate. Impressive, he stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone slightly, scanning the room. For a brief second, his eyes met mine. Something unspoken passed between us, and then he began. I was going to give a very different speech today, he said, his voice steady, practiced. Something inspiring, something safe. A few soft chuckles echoed, but I realized some truths don't wait for the right moment. The room grew quieter. I saw my mother shift slightly in her seat. Daniel continued, his tone changing, less polished, more real. I grew up in what most people would call a perfect family, he said, supportive parents, a stable home, a clear path. He paused. But perfection can be misleading. Now the silence was complete. My heart pounded, but I didn't look away. I have a sibling, he went on, who spent their entire life believing something that wasn't true, not because they were naive, not because they didn't ask questions. His gaze drifted toward our parents, but because the people they trusted most chose to lie. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. My mother's face had gone pale. My father sat frozen. Daniel didn't stop. For 26 years, the truth was hidden. Not lost, not forgotten. Hidden, letters ignored, calls blocked, a person erased. Not because they didn't care, but because someone decided they shouldn't be part of the story. Every word landed heavier than the last. I could feel it. The shift in the room, the weight of realization, the discomfort spreading through the audience. And the worst part, Daniel said, his voice tightening slightly, the person at the center of it all was the only one who didn't know. A tear slipped down my cheek, but I didn't wipe it away. I didn't need to, because for the first time I wasn't ashamed of the truth. I was one of the people who knew. Daniel admitted, his voice quieter now. And I stayed silent. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I was protecting my family. He shook his head. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was helping the lie survive. The room was completely still, and then he looked directly at me. "I'm sorry," he said, not just as a brother, but as someone who had finally chosen truth over comfort. A long silence followed. Then Daniel stepped back from the microphone. No dramatic ending, no applause cue. Just truth, raw and undeniable. The ceremony didn't collapse into chaos like I once imagined. There were no loud confrontations, no shouting matches. Just something far more powerful. Exposure, the kind that couldn't be undone. As people began whispering, as eyes turned toward my parents, I slowly stood up. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in freedom. I walked past the rows of seats, past the weight of years I no longer had to carry. My mother reached for me as I passed, her voice trembling. "Please." I didn't stop, because for once she didn't get to decide what happened next. Outside, the air felt different, lighter, like something heavy had finally been lifted. I took a deep breath, pulling my phone from my pocket. My hands were steady now. No fear, no hesitation. I opened the one thing I had kept hidden since the night in the attic, a number. The only trace of a man who had never stopped trying. My real father. For 26 years, they had controlled the story. They had chosen silence. They had chosen lies. But today, the truth had a voice, and this time it was mine.